Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for March 1st through 7th. This week I read 2 books, I watched 1 movie, and I listened to 2 books. Firstly, happy birthday to my baby brother, who's really not a baby anymore. He's got 3 babies of his own, and all of them are in double digits now. And I sent him a very concerning message this morning about how I was trying to think about something interesting to say about his age, and I realized that the digits of his age, when added up, equal the same age as his youngest child, and this has actually been accurate for quite some time now. And then I went through a breakdown of what that's going to look like in the next decade and the decade after that, and I hope I didn't scare him, but either way, happy birthday. The first book I have to talk about also talks about a father and his son, and that's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. This primarily is a book about philosophy, but it's also a book about a very specific adventure that this father and son went on. And this is a very popular book from 1974. At the beginning of the book, the root philosophical difference that is discussed is the perspective between our main character, the guy who wrote the book, although he never names himself, but we know it's him, talking about how he prefers to do his own motorcycle maintenance so he can make sure that his motorcycle is fine at all times, especially when they're going on long motorcycle trips, whereas his friend John, who he's traveling with, prefers to leave all of that to a mechanic, doesn't want to know anything about that, basically thinks about it the way I think about how does the internet work? I don't know. And I was really enjoying the writing of this in about the first 100 pages of this just over 400-page book. But then the author's obsession with what does quality mean was introduced, and there was a lot of philosophical discussion about that specifically in the next 200 pages, which made them more difficult to get through. This is not me saying it's bad or not worth my time, it was just more difficult to get through, to the point where I had to start reading another book, and I'd tell myself, if you finish this chapter, you can read more of this less challenging book, which was actually a strategy that worked for me, in case anybody else is trying to do something similar. The edition of this I was reading was also a 25th anniversary edition, so from 1999, because again, this was originally published in 1974, and unfortunately there was a section in the back that talked about how 5 years after this was published, the young son, who was about 11 at the time of the story, but not 11 at the time of publishing, was actually mugged and brutally murdered. So that was a thing I had to learn, and now you know it too. Going into this, I really didn't know anything about it, so something you should probably know going into it is there is a very significant mental health aspect to this, to the point where there are things that happen to people in this book that probably aren't used anymore for what they were used for. And quite a significant reveal, again around that 100-page mark, to do with this character that he keeps talking about, and then we come to realize that character is much more prevalent in his life than just somebody from ancient Greece, which is what I initially assumed this character was because of the name that was used. Altogether, a very interesting book. The other book I read with my eyeballs this week, and the one that I was trading off with this first book, is The Ghosts Behind the Door. This is Jen Wilde's second middle grade novel, and this one is all about this character named Maddie, whose family has recently moved in with her grandmother, partly because her grandmother is getting on in age and her mother worries about that, but also partly because one of her parents lost their job where they were living in the city, and it just financially makes more sense for them to all live together, even though her mother hates this town that she came from, and we definitely figure out why when we get there. If you've ever lived in a small town, has there ever been that one house that everybody has decided is haunted, and if anybody actually lives there you kind of side-eye them and you're like, well, that person is definitely a witch? Turns out her grandmother's house is that house in this town, and there's been talk about how the women in this family in particular have been witches for hundreds of years. This means immediately Maddie starts getting picked on at school because all of these people know her last name and it's a local legend. But joke's on all of them when we find out that yes, there are actually ghosts in her house, and yes, people in her family have actually been witches, even though some of them have been put to death just because they were different. I really enjoy how books like this look at the intersection of women from the past who have been deemed different, but instead of trying to understand people, it's just like, no, that's a hysterical woman, or she's a witch, get rid of her. And considering our main character has anxiety and autism, you can understand why this all comes together, because if she has these traits, there's a really good chance that the women who have been killed in her family line for being witches also had these traits. I've never read a Jen Wilde book I didn't like, and this one definitely lived up to my Jen Wilde hype. As for the one movie I watched this week, this is something I put on just because I knew it was going to be an action flick and I recognized a couple of the actors going into it, and that's Anna. This one is a movie from 2019, but it's set in, I believe, the 1980s. It must be, because Russia is not Russia at this point. It's still the Soviet Union. And it takes place primarily in two cities I've both been to, Moscow and Paris. The interesting thing about this movie is we get a lot of plot going forward, and then when something shocking happens, we actually rewind and see how that shocking thing came to be. And this happens 3 or 4 times throughout the movie, which I found actually really interesting. Essentially, we have this character, Anna, who is working at a stall in a market in Moscow and is scouted by a talent agent who takes her to Paris. There she becomes a model, but we come to realize that actually she is a spy. This is one of those films where there's double crossing, triple crossing, you never quite know what's going to happen next. It's not the best film in the world, but I enjoyed my time with it. As for the audiobooks I listened to this week, the first one is Local Woman Missing. This one is interesting because it has a dual timeline. It's set in the present and it's also set 11 years previous to now, and there's a lot of moving pieces because we have a few different point of view characters. One of these characters is a young girl named Delilah who's been kept in a basement for years, and it's dark down there. She doesn't get light unless the door opens when they're just throwing slop in for her to eat. And eventually she wakes up one day and there's also a little boy in the basement with her, but other than that she's had no companionship for she doesn't even know how long. In the timeline of 11 years before, we also have this mother who starts getting these threatening text messages, and then we ultimately know that things don't end well for her, and her daughter, named Delilah, is still missing. We also get the perspective of one of her neighbors, and she's out canvassing trying to help find Meredith and Delilah because nobody's seen them. But then she also ends up talking to this guy whose wife has recently gone missing, and he looks pretty suspicious. But then he's got some things to say that point the suspicion at somebody else completely differently. And then in the present, we also get the perspective of Delilah's little brother, who was very young when she went missing. And obviously the things that happened for his family have greatly impacted him. I'm probably not explaining it well, but that's mostly because I'm not trying to give too much away about it, because it is kind of a whodunit mystery situation, and I want you to figure that out by yourself. But I wanted to also give you the major elements and the points of view. I ended up very much enjoying this one. Hi, Kathy from editing here. I inadvertently lied earlier when I told you I only listened to 2 audiobooks this week, because when I finished one of the books that I read this week, I forgot to write it down in my notes and didn't realize until I opened my laptop and went, oh, what's this book cover doing in this folder? Oh wait, I read this week. I should probably talk about it. That book is The Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. This book is about a woman who should be on her sabbatical, but her boss had a medical emergency, so she had to go back into work to run the department while he's away. And she works at a university in Toronto in the library section, and the biggest thing she has to deal with right now is they recently acquired this 6-volume manuscript that they want to show off to the donors because it came with a hefty price tag, but it's in his safe, and of course she doesn't know the combination to his safe because he updated it recently, didn't tell her what it was because she was on sabbatical, even though she actually called him to be like, hey, when you update the safe code, remember to tell me, and he didn't. However, when she eventually gets into the safe, she finds out the manuscript's not there and it's missing, and that's bad. However, the president of the university won't let her just call the police so they can figure it out, so she's constantly just scouring the stacks trying to figure out what happened to this manuscript. This is basically a whole big whodunit about who stole these books, and it was pretty good actually. One of the things going into this I noticed is it has a fairly low rating, and I think that's because nobody in this book is actually like a perfect person. For example, our main character considers cheating, and we know that she's probably cheated on her husband way in the past. And she still works with that guy, and he still flirts with her, which is kind of an issue. But then there's also mental health issues in this one, and there's a lot to really get into. I enjoyed this one. I didn't enjoy it much more than the average online, but I did enjoy it nonetheless. The other audiobook I listed this week is another middle grade book, and that's Eli Over Easy. This is all about Eli. He and his father live in New York City, although they're originally from, I believe it was Minnesota. And the two of them moved to New York about 7 or 8 months ago with Eli's mother, who has since actually passed because of that thing that is still going on, but was especially prevalent in 2020. His mother used to do all of the cooking because she was a professional chef, and it's gone to the point where he is just so sick of reheating frozen burritos that he decides he wants to actually make some of the food that she has made before. He's also 13 and being left alone at home in the apartment when his dad has to go out to work. There's a really nice neighbor that's checking in on him, and he does have basically summer school to do because he was accepted into this coding class he's been wanting to take for ages. While he's poking around on the computer doing the things for coding class, he realizes that his mother actually has a YouTube channel that has videos that are completely unlisted, and he realizes he now has a chance to actually learn recipes directly from his mother. One big problem, however, is his dad doesn't want him to cook while he's not in the apartment because he doesn't want him to use the stove, but then also his dad doesn't usually like to talk about her food too much. It seems like Eli feels closer to her when talking about the food and making the food, whereas it just bums his dad out, and this is obviously a big conflict. Additionally, that really nice neighbor that is checking in every once in a while, her grandson is visiting for the summer and they become friends, and then by the end of the book maybe they're a little bit more than friends. This book is adorable, obviously has to do with grief and really complicated feelings, which is the type of middle grade book that I just absolutely adore. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!